So we'll start in 12:04. So Arun and Ankur, I will open the floor for you guys, and then you guys can explain the slides. This is not a formal presentation. This would be a more interactive. So we can take the questions in the middle, but to save the time, I really encourage to ask the question at the end, maybe 10, 15 minute at the end, we will separate for the specific questions. So first, I request Ankur and Arun to go ahead and start the presentation. This presentation is for the water resources, NOI permitting. They have a new process launched. So we ourselves in WRE and also related other task force need to be aware of this. That's why we have this session. So Ankur and Arun, go ahead and start the presentation, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mahendra. And I would like to welcome everybody. This is like a more informal type of presentation. So, like Mahendra said, like if you have any question that can wait until the end, then you can save it. Or if you feel an urgent need to ask that question, go ahead and ask it. It's a comparatively short presentation, so you can ask questions if you have in the middle of the presentation. So with that being said, yeah, today we're gonna be presenting some of the new updates to the NOI permitting. As you may be aware of, like whenever you are discharging your runoff from your construction site, we need to have this NOI permit in hand. Otherwise, MDE can come and stop your work. So there has been some recent updates to it. So we are going to go over it, and then we'll be also going over some of the general stormwater management procedure, specifically for the MDOT projects, talking about PRD and HSD processes. So this we try to make it as simple as possible, so that we don't go too much deep into the technical details, so that it will be easy for everybody to understand. So let's begin the training. Uh, so now, feel free to jump in whenever you want, or you think I missed anything. Yeah, just chime in. So let's say stormwater. So why do we need stormwater management? Why can't we just let everything fall to a river or lake? So that's a very easy question, because as you develop a site, you're adding a lot of impervious area. And with the impervious area, there are a lot of pollutants that comes with it. For example, a roadway project. When you add a roadway, what happens? There are vehicles that travel along that roadway which has contaminants like an oil leak or your gasoline, even the rubber from the tires of the vehicle. Those are all kind of contaminants. When you develop a site that deals with a lot of chemicals, then there will be chemical contaminants that will be coming out from that site. A typical example would be a dyeing industry where you dye clothes, or any manufacturing industry such as the pesticide manufacturing industry. So those are all pollutants that eventually run off to our watershed and wreak havoc. Like if you have heard about algae bloom, which I think is a very serious problem in Chesapeake Bay, that's all due to the fertilizers that's being run off from the agricultural field, which end up in our storm drain system and eventually wash out to the bay, where it's feeding all the algae, and with all that nutrients added to it, the algae bloom, it's creating like a lack of oxygen in the bay area that's killing all the native fish and species. So not only that, like with any development, there are debris. We are disturbing land, so there will be erosion. And those all fine particles that eventually lead to the degradation of the uh, environment in the local watershed. So to control that, we need to have some sort of management or filtering measures put in place. Um, Also, with increased development, you're adding increased impervious area. So if you go back to your basics, like there are a number of ways that water gets recycled. So when it rains, some infiltrates into the ground, some are intercepted by the trees, by its leaves, and they get evapotranspiration, which goes back to the atmosphere. And some end up in the our drainage and river system. So with the increased development, we are interrupting that path. So we are putting more impervious, so there are less chances of water to infiltrate or evapotranspirate. So we're adding more and more runoff, which causes flooding and for like it's not usually a big problem for a new development but for the old development, that could be a very serious problem. A typical example will be the flooding that happened in Ellicott City, I think, a few years ago. There was some debris that blocked the path of the stream, and then the water over flooded the stream, and then it was all over the town. So those are the some typical examples why we need stormwater management. And with every new development, I think now pretty much all the jurisdictions are pushing for this kind of management. So when do we need to provide the stormwater management? Generally speaking, with any kind of land development that has the disturbance over 5,000 square feet, requires the stormwater management treatment. Uh, Not all the developments are classified as disturbance. For example, if you are ripping out the top layer of your road, that a mill and overlay typically, you're only ripping out like a top 2 inches of the road and you're putting the same surface back. So that's typically not considered as a disturbance unless like you do a full depth payment where you're disturbing the subbase, then that would be considered as a limit of disturbance. So whenever the limit of disturbance gets above 5,000 square feet, or in terms of erosion sediment control, whenever you're removing 100 cubic yard of dirt from your site, then you are supposed to provide some sort of management for that or some sort of erosion sediment control. But there are exclusions. For example, the agricultural activity, when you're plowing your fields to grow crops, you are disturbing the earth, but that's not considered for the stormwater management. Or certain activities in agricultural sectors, such as if you are building a pond to irrigate crops in your farm, then I think that activity also is also exempted from the stormwater management treatment requirements. Uh, Anything other than that, most of the time, we do have to provide stormwater management for that. So in Maryland, your stormwater management plans and erosion sediment control plans, it's generally reviewed by these four entities, your federal projects or any projects that deal with the critical areas or the floodplains environmental impacts. Those will be reviewed by MDE. All our state highway projects, I believe those are mostly reviewed by PRD and HSD. PRD, they review mostly the stormwater management and erosion sediment control. And HSD, they are more concerned about the drainage part of that development. There are counties who enforce their own stormwater management guidelines. And so if it's not SHA project, or if it's a project that's jointly done by county and SHA, then such type of projects will most probably be reviewed by both, mostly counties. And then there are cities which have their own guideline. For example, the city of Rockville in Montgomery County, the city of Gaithersburg, and I think the city of Kensington or Tacoma Park, they also have their own review department. But I may be wrong in case of city of Tacoma Park. So they also review their own stormwater management plans. And for today's presentation, we are going to focus on the HSD and PRD process. Some of you may be well aware of this, but for some, this might be a new thing. Your PRD and MDE, actually PRD, it's divided into three-step process. So whenever you get a project, you start working on a project, the project goes through a concept phase where you get together with the project manager at the DOT, and you discuss about the projects, what are the improvements you're doing, and based on that, you just do a preliminary design investigation of the project where you can provide some stormwater management facilities. You collect information about the utilities and other constraints that might impact your design. Also, you might want to find out if there are any newer version of the application form, because I find that that gets updated time to time. So any checklist that that might be relevant to your projects, you might want to get hold of those too. So in concept plan preparation, in our water resource department, we go through these steps. First of all, you look at your project and you look at the limit of disturbance. And based on your limit of disturbance, you have to identify the point of investigation. If it's a concentrated flow that's leaving your site, which is generally SHA right of way or LOD, or like if it's a sheet flow that's leaving your site, you would consider that as a line of investigation. So you identify those points, and depending on your project, it might be like only a few of them, or if it's a linear project, you generally end up with a lot of POIs and LOIs. And one thing that we need to make sure is your LOI or your POI includes the entire LOD. Like no LODs left without being analyzed at the end of the project. Then based on that, for each POI and LOI, you calculate your IART, which stands for impervious area requiring treatment. Now, that is based on your category of your project, and we're gonna touch on that later, like how is a project categorized or what kind of project. So your IRT depends on like if it's a new development or if it's a like a redevelopment. It could be also combined development. So that will determine how much IRT you would have in that project. And you would also calculate your ESD based on the IRT within that LOD. Some jurisdiction, like if there's a historical problem of flooding, then those jurisdiction will have some certain guideline that will require you to control certain year flood. I think, for example, in Prince George's County, you're supposed to control 10 and 100 year, but in other jurisdiction which are like not so much developed, they might only require you to control 10 year. So depending on the historical flooding, each jurisdiction has their own guideline, and that's also called quantity control. So when you develop a site, you need to show those jurisdiction that your post-development runoff is either equal or less than the pre-development runoff. And there are ways, like if it's not always you can do that. Sometimes the runoff can exceed what's in the pre-existing condition. Actually, most of the time they do. So in those conditions, either you have to control that runoff by implementing certain uh, features, such as detention or routing it through the your stormwater management facilities, or just proving that any increase in that runoff is not going to negatively impact the outfall condition, because the outfall is in very good condition. So if you could show that, there are certain ways and waivers that you can file, and they would let you get away, or they would let you increase that runoff in the proposed condition. So in the concept, we also determine based on your POIs, like where we can provide some stormwater management facility. We've identified those locations. We also look at if we are proposing microbiome retention somewhere. Let's say, is there a outfall source? Like, is there a way we can outfall that microbiome retention properly? We can't just propose a bioswale and expect runoff to magically disappear after it's being treated. So we need to look into all that thing. Like, we need to make sure the outfall is stable, and there is enough fall. Like, if you're outfalling a microbiome retention to an existing storm drain system, then you need to make sure those inverts from your microbiome retention to the existing storm drain system, they work. So those are a few things. Also, one of the main thing we identified during concept is, like, if you're not able to provide a stormwater management facility within the SHA right of way, then do you need additional right of way? Like, if you're going offsite, do you need to have some sort of easement or some sort of agreement with the property owners? So those have to be identified during the concept, and those have to be relayed, or those have to be conveyed to the project managers in during this phase, so that they could start that process early on. And just a few documentation that we provide for the concept plan is like any environmental resources, also called resources inventory mapping, where we identify the site that had, identify features in the site. Those are environmentally sensitive. Those could be like forested areas or wetlands, your streams, steep slopes, your karst topography if you're working towards if you're working in Frederick or Washington County, any floodplains, tidal wetlands. So those kind of features have to be identified, and that's generally shown in our environmental resources map. Also, if any development in your project, if it's needs to be reviewed by MDE, because there's a MDE upon 378 code that requires you to look at certain things in a stormwater management facility. If it exceeds certain things, then it needs to go through that review process. So you need to determine if your site has to go through it, because that's a lengthy process. So that's it's best if it's identified during the initial stage of your project. Um, and we include all the drainage area map, so that includes your existing condition, your proposed condition, all the runoff, that's pre and post runoff, those are computed, and all your EST requirement, like how much required, how much you have provided in your project, how much IART that's required, and how much IART you are provided. So those all are gathered, calculated, and then we compile a report based on our computations and our findings. We also put together a concept plan that shows the preliminary location of these facilities. Uh, and there are other forms and waivers, like, for example, if there's a POI and you're not meeting the requirement, the stormwater management requirement, the IART or EST in that POI, then you have two options, basically. So you can either provide the same amount of treatment in some other POI, but there's also two part with that. Like for your water quality, it which is like your first flush, they say it's a first 1 inch of rainfall that has the most pollutant. It has to be provided within the same POI and remaining up to the 1 year, 24-hour rainfall, which for most of the county is 2.6 inches. It can be provided in within same watershed, but it doesn't have to be within the same POI. So in certain time you can meet that requirement, but there are projects where you can't do it. So in such cases, there are process you need to follow, and there are like variances and that you can file, and you can ask for that permission from the DOT or PRD or HST. When you're not meeting your quantity requirement, like I said, your post drainage or post peak runoff has to be less than equal to pre uh, development runoff. So when you can't meet those, then there are waivers that you need to apply for, and there are different categories. Like so, you have to identify which under which category you're filing a waiver for, and you also need, when you apply for such waiver, you also need to get a permission from the county, because it's ultimately the uh, county property or the county jurisdiction that you're outfalling to. So you have to get a permission from the county that you can do that. So the way we do it is we apply for a concurrence letter. So at the end of the project, the county representative signs that letter, and that gives us the permission to increase, if we are increasing the flow. So other things that goes in the report are your typical water quality summary sheet. So this is the spreadsheet that includes all your IART and EST requirement for each POI. And if you haven't seen one, we can probably share it with you if you're interested. Also, there are other sheets like EST summary sheet. I didn't even list few of them because if your impervious area gets transferred between POIs, then there is another spreadsheet that we fill out. So those kind of documentation we provide, we include in our report, and then I think that's the conceptual plan that we submit. Once the concept plan is submitted, it goes through the review by PRD and HST. Usually PRD reviews the stormwater management and erosion sediment control portion, and HST reviews the drainage part of it. Once we address all those comments and concept are approved, then we go to the site development phase. In this phase, like we generally address any remaining comments from the concept phase And then we also, if there are any conditions that was in the approval letter, then we address those conditions. We also develop the full design detail. In this phase, for example, if you're putting microbiota, then we provide all the typical sections, profiles, um, all the inverts. Uh, if you're putting bioswale, then yeah, profile of the bioswale. So everything in detail. So we try to provide it during the site development phase. If there are any concurrence letters or variances that needs to be signed by the county or HSD, then that needs to be signed. Um, and so in concept, we generally only include the general notes and few typical detail for erosion sediment control plan. But during the site development phase, we go and do the full design of the ENS plan. So that also gets reviewed. If there are any MOT, then I think our highway team develop MOT plans for that. And if your project has to go through the MDE pond review, then this is the stage where we get those done. So once the site development phase is completed, then basically all only thing you are doing is like you're addressing the last remaining comments that PRD or HSD may have, and then you provide them with all the construction tables, schedules, any specifications or cost estimates. Uh, and your project might get also go through the constructability review from SHA department. So they might also have some comments, so you would address those comments during this stage. And any dams safety or any pond review comments that MDE might have, you'd have to address that by this stage. Any signatures, those are required on the plans, certifications, concurrence letters, water quality summary sheet. Those have to be completed before your final plan can be approved. So any questions so far on the stormwater management before we begin the NOI?
I just want to clarify about the size of the disturbance.
Yes, go ahead.
5,000 square feet.
Mhm.
At
Can
MDE.
can you hear him? Solomon, I think your microphone's really low.
Okay. How about now?
Yeah,
Yeah, it
Hear
is
me?
good
better.
now. Yep. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to clarify. I don't know the PRD, but at MDE, the size of LOD, if it is greater than 5,000 square feet, both are required stormwater management and erosion and sediment control. If it is less than 5,000, stormwater management requirement automatically disappears, but for the erosion and sediment control, uh, the 100 cubic yard is a threshold. So is that the same thing for PRD?
Yeah, that is same thing for PRD Solomon. And also, I like to quickly input here is what is the difference between SHA review and MDE review? They are similar because all state and federal funded projects need to be reviewed by the state agency, which is MDE. But SHA worked out with MDE to get a general permit. There is an agreement in between SHA and MDE for the general permit so that SHA can review their own projects but need to be documented and submitted to MDE. An yearly audit from MDE happens on those projects. So SHA reviews and PRD reviews are under the same umbrella, but SHA got a general permit to take care of their projects, but they need to get audited from MDE. So basically, it is the MDE is the ultimate review agency. Okay.
Hmm.
Yes, thank
Okay.
you, Mahendra and Solomon. Yeah, I think a few, even think a few years ago. I don't know how long back, but I think SHA projects used to be reviewed by MDE.
Yeah.
I forgot like how long ago was this.
Used to
but-
be
It is around 6-7 years.
6
Then they got a
years.
general permit.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Quick
Alright,
question for me.
Yep.
When I'm trying to figure out if there is a generic formula that highway or site designer can use. If you say I have, you know, 200 square foot of IoT in previous area that needs to be treated, is there a formula that can give me a quick area where I will have my pond? Just for the concepts, level, because when we do our concept, you have a parking lot and you're trying to make sure that you leave enough room for potential stormwater. I was wondering if there's a quick formula that can help us, so that way when we do the concept, we always keep in mind that I need to leave some areas for that, the sizing of the pond.
Yeah,
I
to
think,
answer your question,
yes.
Jesse, there is a formula. I think maybe when Arun gets chance, he will show you. And there is some formula with RV and then A and PE and divided by 12. But those couple of things, if you take a 5 minute quick, I think guide from Arun, you can do that for a very approximate level. Okay.
Yeah, so JC, so there's a formula that lets you calculate your EST requirement based on how much impervious you have. And depending on what type of facility you're providing, your volume depending on that volume, you'll have to size that facility. So yeah, I mean, there is a very quick process. But yeah, I can show it to you when you get a chance.
All right,
the
thanks.
other fact is also after you have the ESD volume requirement, the ponding depth is limited. So based on that, you determine the area what you are required, because you don't put a ponding more than one foot, so that will determine your area for that volume.
Great, thank you very much. Yep.
Sure.
Yep, that's great input. Arun, go ahead.
One
Okay,
thing I'll
so-
add there, JC, just so one like big thing is we can leave open space for like a facility wherever, like in new site designs. But the critical thing is you have to have impervious area draining to that location. So, when you're doing some preliminary stuff, it's important to keep that in mind, just, thinking about the contours and how it's gonna flow. And having it flow to some open space will be like, it'll make our stuff very a lot simpler.
Awesome, thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, so I can go ahead, Arun, on this NOI stuff. So some of you may have heard the requirements for this have changed as of April of this year. So the requirements got a little bit more stringent, and essentially, I'm not sure what brought about it, but essentially the MD is cracking down on construction and making sure that there's not whole lot of illicit discharges and stuff that are going on during the actual construction phase. So typically, we have erosion and sediment control plans for all projects, essentially, besides very small ones. So that kind of is the basics of stopping sediment from leaving the site. But the purpose of this stuff is to stop more of the chemicals, just in general, if you're using paint, fertilizer, some like vehicle washing, and just like storage of building materials that could cause seepage kind of thing. So this NOI is a typical requirement. It's a statewide discharge permit for stormwater, and it's required for all projects where your limit of disturbance is above 1 acre. The way you do it for MDOT projects is a little bit, or it's a good bit different than non-MDOT projects. So similar to like how PRD is the review agency for stormwater management for MDOT, they kind of handle this notice of intent thing internally. So for MDOT projects, there's I put a couple links here. So the second one towards the bottom of that page, whenever you're working on it, it's a good idea to check it, especially now. I noticed like every couple months they kind of update some other documents. And if you submit old documents, they'll just, make a comment and you have to redo it. So it's a good idea to check this if anyone's ever working on it. For MDOT, there's a pretty standard forms. It's like an application. You have to fill in some information. Some of it's to do with like what your contaminants are and just general information about the site. So the purpose is so MDE can find, like during construction, MDE can will have contact information for the appropriate person who's like in charge of this environmental aspect of construction, and they can like inspect and have, enforce the law essentially. The application has a good amount of stuff with that. It has some general items like a vicinity map, and just some other like checklist forms, and all that stuff is submitted to HHD. They'll essentially request it during the final review stages of a project. And HHD then, once they get all the documentation, they coordinate with MDE to get the actual permit. Rather than for non-MDOT projects, we would submit directly to MDE. They have like an e-permit website, and it's fairly straightforward to just get that submitted. And then once it does get submitted to MDE, they essentially put it on their website. So they'll put like some basic description of the project and like the anticipated kind of environmental concerns on their website. And the public is, I don't know who knows about it, but it's available for the public to comment on. So if anyone, if there's a neighbor next to the construction site that has a lot of concerns about it, they might call, and something might have to change from there. Or might have to be more stringent or kind of just satisfy the public needs. You can go to the next slide. So one of the big changes with the recent, the latest law, the 20 CP requirements is this stormwater management pollution prevention plan. So essentially all that is a document. It's a Word document template they have. MDE has a long version of it, I'll say, that includes every, stipulation of any type of project. That thing, I think it's available on MD's website. If someone needs it, I can link you to it, but it's something like 50 pages long. Whereas MDOT kind of has, they just released as of June, I think middle of June, they released their own sort of template version, which is much shorter. I think it's just 6 pages or so. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the new ENS general note sheets that MDOT also published. So a lot of those, if you read through it, a lot of those notes are related to environmental things. So instead of kind of having to repeat the information within this SWPPP on every project, they kind of incorporated those notes into the general notes, ENS general notes. So it's kind of taken care of that way, and that's what allowed them to reduce that document from like 50 pages to 7 pages. So the triggers essentially are for, the projects type that we work on. It's kind of the ones I listed there: equipment fueling. We did have a training with MD, and someone specifically asked that question, like if you have just like a canister of gas and you're kind of fueling your tractors or whatever. With that, I don't think that's what they're looking for, but they're more looking if for large construction projects, sometimes the construction team will keep a large, 100-gallon fuel tank or something on site. So that's kind of the thing so in that instance, you would have to put some barrier around it. So if it leaks, it doesn't just, spill into the ground kind of thing, but it's some sort of secondary containment. That's kind of like a construction thing. When we're doing our design, you don't really know. You might have an idea if it's a very large project, but not something you're going to know for sure. Paint chemical additives, I know, are not sure if anyone from our structural team's here, but you know, a lot of bridge projects have painting aspects involved, so that's one trigger. And the big one is the use of fertilizers. So whenever you specify any sort of grading or essentially disturbance in non-paved areas, you have to reseed it, right? Like put turf grass or some matting or sod back after or you know towards the end of completion. So when they put that stuff in, they also put fertilizer to help the grass grow. So that's a typical one on pretty much every project that we have is fertilizers. So currently MDOT doesn't have this exemption, but MDE in their kind of laws, it has an exemption for projects where the LOD is between 1 acre and 5 acres, where if your only kind of triggering factor is like concrete washout. So if you're essentially just concrete, cleaning the equipment used for concrete and fertilizers, then you wouldn't need to do this SWPPP. However, in the latest stuff from MDOT, it doesn't have that exemption. So currently this might change, like I feel like they will change it at some point, but as of now, you would still essentially you need for MDOT projects, as of now, you need an SWPPP if your LOD is over an acre for all projects. Yeah, I think that's about it. It's not an overly complicated process, but it's just something you have to keep in mind and do towards the end of projects. That's all I had for that.
Okay, thank you, Ankur. Does anybody have any questions so far on NOI? No. In that case, we're gonna go through some of the slide where we will talk about some general terms those are used in stormwater management. And yeah, most of the people who deal with stormwater management, they know these terms, but might be new for some folks. So we're gonna go over it, and hopefully by end of this training, you'd have some idea on it about it. So like I previously mentioned, when you start a project, your project is typically categorized into 3 categories: redevelopment, new development, and combination of both. So what triggers that is like if you have a site and you have a LOD, and if the existing impervious area in that LOD is greater than 40%, and you're not increasing the net impervious area at the end of your project, then such project is typically called redevelopment. Whereas any development that has an existing impervious area equal to or less than 40%, those are categorized under new development. And the combination is like when you have impervious area that's greater than 40%, existing impervious area that's greater than 40%, but at the same time, you're increasing the net impervious area at the end of the project, then that kind of project is categorized under the combined redevelopment and new development. We summarize all this in our water quality, like our water quality map generally shows you the areas. Those are new impervious areas. Impervious areas, those are reconstructed. I mean, that means that you are ripping out some of the existing impervious area, for example, old sidewalk, and you're putting a new sidewalk. That's considered a reconstruction. And if you are removing some impervious area completely at the end of the project, then that would be also shown in the water quality map. So, and also the general spreadsheet that we use to calculate our stormwater management, it will have your new impervious area and existing impervious area. Yeah, so this is how we generally categorize our development, and based on that, they have requirement, different requirement for stormwater management. For example, if you're developing a site that can be categorized under redevelopment, then you can satisfy the stormwater management by reducing your existing impervious area by 50%, which is like if you're removing an old parking lot, let's say, and putting just a playground area without any impervious surface, that you're basically removing 50%, just for an example, then you have satisfied your stormwater management. Or you can provide treatment for the 50% of the existing impervious area within that LOD. Then if you provide that 50% treatment, then you have satisfied the stormwater management for that development. For any new development,
Aaron,
you
can I-
have, yes,
for that 50%, you need only to treat one inch, right?
yes,
Okay.
yeah. So for any water quality, so when we say water quality, we are talking about the 1-inch PE. Anything above that, up to 2.6 inch, that's CPV. We can touch base on that later, but yeah, I'm talking about the water quality here. For any new development, you are supposed to provide treatment of 100% of the new impervious area plus the existing impervious area within your LOD. So you're required to treat the entirety of the impervious area that's within your LOD. So a few other things that come up during our discussion, which might be confusing, is water quality volume. What is the water quality volume? And this verbiage, I took it directly from the SHA manual. So it says like it's the 90% of the annual runoff volume at the project site, the 90% of your 1 year, 24-hour rainfall event, which is for I think Montgomery County, it's 2.6 inches. I think it's PG County, 2.7 inches. But for first 1 inch of that rainfall, it's considered as a water quality volume, because that's the water that will contain the most pollutant, and that's why that needs to be treated with a stormwater management facility. I mean, it's recommended that those are treated by EST facilities if possible. So that's called the water quality. Anything above that, up to the 2.6 or 2.7 inches, that's called the channel protection volume. You will have to treat the water quality. The water quality has to be provided within the same POI. Whereas your anything above that, your channel protection, and Solomon, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that could be provided in any other POI or within the same watershed.
Yes. Water quality at any 6-digit watershed,
Yeah.
but the quantity, since we are protecting channels, it has to be at the POI.
Right. Okay. So other term that gets thrown around all the time is water we say quantity control. So what's the water quantity control? And this has to do with the historical flooding issue that I mentioned before. So some jurisdictions have very serious issues with flooding, whereas some rural areas they might not have. So based on that, different jurisdictions have different requirement. As you come, I mean, as you go into the urban areas, they are having more and more problem with the flooding, so they might have more stringent flood requirement, for flood control requirement. They might tell you to control your 2-year or 10-year, and obviously 100-year. But some of the areas, like if you go to Garrett County or Washington County, they might only tell you to control your 100-year and sometimes 10-year. So yeah, those are usually based on where your site is located and what's the criteria set by that jurisdiction. And the way we do the quantity control are we can show, like, once you have your ESD facilities, what you're basically doing is you're trying to mimic the natural, or you're trying to bring your site back to its original condition, or like woods in good condition. That's what they say. So what you're trying to do here is trying to provide enough opportunity for the water to get to treat it by infiltration before it runs down to the stream and then cause problems later on. So we can route it through our stormwater management facilities. We can also, if it's a large quantity control that's required, then we generally go for facilities like a stormwater management pond or underground detention system. But those are more costlier. And for the small projects, we generally just try to use RCN reduction or the routing through the storm water management facilities. You want to go through this, Uncle?
Yeah, so there's they're kind of like, a lot of people like kind of interchange the words a little bit, but they're the word ESD, so it's environmental site design, and versus BMP, best management practice, they technically come from, like, all stormwater management requirements are generally based on the MDE stormwater management manual. And then, you know, like PRD or different counties or whatever you're working in might have some additive items, like that they, you know, make some aspects more stringent or less stringent, and based on their needs. But it's all based on that. So like chapter 3 of this manual is for BMP design. So those are like larger scale facilities. They're, you know, like Arun mentioned, they're ponds, sometimes underground storage structures, versus ESD are more easy, like you don't need as much room, and they're in general more aesthetic, right? Like they're microbioretentions, like things in parking lots like this, or swales, and just micro scale facilities. So they all have like limitations based on drainage areas. So for these ESD means like essentially micro scale practice. So other than submerged gravel wetland, they all have drainage area limitations of like on an acre or less. So you can't have, you know, 10 acres of land drained to a microbioretention, because it's not going to function as it's intended to. So a lot of jurisdictions now really focus on what it's called ESD to MEP, so environmental site design to the maximum extent practicable. So they really want you to see, rather than like putting one pond and kind of having your whole site drain there, they really want you to not do that, and rather have like 4 or 5 microbioretention facilities that overall will, you know, function the similar in a quality perspective, but it'll just provide more aesthetic design and in like environmental benefits. So that's kind of where stormwater management is right now. And I think the next slide, I think, is similar, if you want to just go to that. And so there's also like structural practices. So you know, the top one is another example of just an ESD facility, some sort of swale or bioretention in, you know, between a sidewalk and the travel lane. Whereas on the bottom there is a underground storage type facility. So this thing, so water would be routed into this system, and if you see there, it's like arched pipes with no bottom on them. So the bottom, depending on what kind of volume you need to achieve, you can size the stone under there, and based on the porosity of the stone, essentially the voids in the stone, you can quantify that for like the quantity control purposes, plus the storage within the open part of the pipe as well. So this is something that might go under like a big parking lot or something, it helps if you have space constraints, and if there's not if your requirements are so large, so that ESD practices, you've kind of exhausted them, and you still need to meet your requirements. This is another way to do it, but again, you have to kind of exhaust all your options to provide smaller scale facilities before usually jurisdictions will let you kind of do something like this. But in general, it's like Arun mentioned, the whole purpose of stormwater management is to return any developed area to like woods in good condition. So how water quality and quantity wise would leave the site if like rain fell on a wooded area versus if you're developing it into a parking lot or whatever you're doing, you're supposed to return it back to woods in good condition is kind of the rule. So that's what all these things are designed to do. I can do this one too. So there's a lot of confusion, like waivers, variances, county concurrence. You might see these in our stormwater management report, or you might see comments on them. It's different jurisdictions have different ways of doing it, but I'm going to focus for this one. I'm going to focus on the Maryland MDOT procedures. So there's a CPV variance, so that's something you submit to PRD. So that's essentially CPV is channel protection volume. So that's the difference, not to get too technical, but water quality volume is the 1 inch PE. So the first 1 inches of rain that fall, it's like treating that. Versus ESD volume is based on the soil conditions and stuff. Usually it's like 1.8 inches or 2 inches. There's some table to calculate it, but so if you can meet the water quality volume overall, but you can't meet the CPV per POI, then there's like a variance request letter that you have to address to PRD, essentially saying we can't meet the requirements of the stormwater management manual for this reason, and you have to. Lately, a lot of reviewers are really making us really spell it out, like thoroughly investigate and just prove that we can't, put more facilities somewhere. So it's something that is kind of getting more and more stringent, but it's something that you need to start at concept, but it needs to be finally approved before final approval. So that's CPV variance. Design variance is HHD has some criteria. One of the most common ones is the 10 utility clearance. They also have like rules for like a maximum slope of swales and things like that. So if you can't meet any of those requirements, there's a design variance that you have to request by HHD and get that approved before you can, move forward with whatever you want to design. And then the last one is a waiver, which just MDOT project manager can sign, but that's a waiver for quantity control. If you can't meet the 2-year or 10-year or 100-year, whatever you're required to do for quantity control, you have to create a waiver for that. And then the last one is county concurrence. So this is another thing for MDOT. So MDOT has the approval authority, but they also need whenever you're increasing quantity control in a county, they have to actually go to that specific county's review department and kind of get them to also accept your justification that you can't provide quantity control. And essentially they'll do that, but sometimes you run into issues where if you're outfalling to a place that the county knows there's some active erosion going on, or there's some flooding issues or anything really drainage related that is an issue, they have the right to deny that request, and then you're kind of back to the drawing board, and you have to redo your reinvestigate your stormwater management and do some stuff. So all these things are you just need them final approval before final, but you sort of need to make sure everyone's on board at the concept stages, because if one of these things is not accepted, it's kind of like you have to go backwards.
Hey, Ankur. I think our highway meeting is already started, so maybe let's give a 1 minute for a question, and the rest questions, Arun and Ankur, you can receive via the email and you can respond to the group, okay? Yeah, let's open floor for 1 minute, a couple of questions, and then we will jump to the highway meeting. Okay, no questions?
Doesn't look like it.
Yep. And anybody, if you have any question, please shoot email to Arun, Ankur, or myself, and we will reply to the entire group. So that would be helpful. Thank you, Arun and Ankur, for your presentation, and thank you everybody for the presence and participations. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.